if a child is playing like this, it's for a reason. What they're doing is not sabotaging their own lives. What they're doing is optimizing their future prospects by doing things in a way and in an order that is going to make sense to them and that's going to unlock the best potential for them in the future. So, Andrew, there's a way that autistic children can typically play that non-autistic parents might be worried about, because it looks like it's repetitive and uncreative. So, for example, they might line things up. They might spend hours lining things up in a line, a game that would seem totally pointless to the parent. Or they might just stay staring at a car wheel as they're spinning it round and round. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's it's so important for again, parents to consider and wonder about that piece. You know, why is my child playing in these particular ways? And I think, just to go back, just to sort of touch on my own journey over the years as a professional of deepening my understanding of certainly of autistic people, but of play in general, it was incredibly helpful to learn about typical stages of play in child development, right? So I had all of these years of working with, autistic children and seeing sometimes autistic children playing in particular ways with toys or objects that seemed different from what their same age peers would be doing. And one of the most important lessons for me in studying child development was really seeing that there is a very particular kind of sequence that children go through in learning how to sort of explore the world around them through play, right? And what was so important for me to recognize is that a lot of the play that autistic children were doing was very similar to the play oftentimes that sometimes younger children were doing, again, as a way to get information about the world around them. So, for example, many younger children, the early stages of play with toys and objects are just like exploring toys in a very intense sensory way, right? So by exploring how things feel when you touch them, how they sound when you bang them on things, biting toys, right? You can get a very powerful sense of like what the plastic feels like on a pen when you chew on it or bite it. And so a lot of young children are just exploring toys and they're getting a lot of very powerful sensory information about the world around them that way. And so when I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a sort of a weird or a strange thing in any way that autistic children are doing. They're just getting very powerful sensory information about the objects and the toys around them. And they need that in some ways because perhaps being in the social environment that they're in is overwhelming and confusing. So they're basically trying to create a very powerful, predictable experience for themselves by exploring or engaging in toys in a certain way. And so what that helped me do so much was have more curiosity about what a child may be doing, and also help me begin to try to just connect with them there through those experiences by, for example, saying something to a child like, you really like how that sounds, don't you? And even doing that sort of banging with them, for example, or again, just being with a child and observing them as they're engaging with a toy in the way that's most meaningful for them without immediately trying to change it and immediately jumping in and trying to correct it. And that, so part of what I always start with parents, I will show parents video clips of younger children engaging in sensory play, for example, and banging toys and chewing toys and shaking toys, so that parents begin to have these aha moments of, oh my goodness, wow, that's exactly what my child is doing. And they're having this intense sensory experience. And it's okay. And all children do that. And that can sometimes really calm down this fear of, oh my gosh, I've got to immediately stop it and correct it. So that's one starting point.
What would you say to the parents then who understood that, and it sort of, you know, partially gave them some understanding, but they were still worried because their autistic child was doing it in a different way and was doing it more intensely, and when the other children had moved on to using the sort of toy figures to, you know, have games with each other where they're playing with each other or fighting with each other or relating to each other in some way and therefore learning about the social world, the autistic child is lining up the toys, and the parents think, well, that means that, you know, they're just in a conceptual way, they're closing themselves off from the social world.
Yeah. I get those questions, as you can imagine, all the time, because parents are very concerned and very terrified. And again, they are getting very powerful messages, usually from, you know, systems of care, child development people, about, you know, your child essentially needs to be pushed to catch up developmentally, or your child needs to be pushed to be doing things that are going to connect them more to what their neurotypical peers are doing. Right. So if the child that's lining up cars, right? Let's say there's a child that's in a preschool situation, and the other kids are sort of playing a bit more interactively with cars, and the neurodivergent or autistic child is either spinning the wheels or is lining up the cars. The question I would ask is not, how do we stop that child from doing what they're doing and immediately pull them and redirect them to play with other children, but how do we help that child, right, become essentially more calm and relaxed and open and available and interested in what's going on around them, so that they can decide to move towards the other children because there's something interesting happening there that they want to be a part of. And I always help remind parents that, because I think the fear that can be underneath for a lot of parents is oh my gosh, what if my child doesn't want to play with other kids? Oh my gosh, oh no, that's terrifying. They're going to be socially isolated for the rest of their lives. We have to sort of push, we have to force, we have to glue them to other children. And I always say to parents, unfortunately, that's a wonderful intention to have, but in doing that, what you're unfortunately going to do is you're going to usually have the opposite effect. You're going to create a situation where your child is more stressed out, more overwhelmed, where they're being pushed and forced to interact with other children in a way that is too much, too fast for them. And we need to allow your child room and time and space to just get comfortable around other children, to observe other children, sometimes for a long time, to even just play alongside of other children or in parallel with other children, which all children do, by the way. Children do not, all neurotypical children do not go from like playing sort of by themselves with toys to jumping into interactive play. It never works like that. Children spend a lot of time keeping their own toys and doing their own play and looking out at and observing sometimes just for a second what the other children are doing. Then they go back to playing by themselves because they're just not ready to make that leap yet. And that's a very important process to understand for all parents, not to push and force. But what I see and what I've seen over and over again over the last 30 plus years is those children, unfortunately, then when there's no one pushing and forcing them, are more disengaged and more fearful around other children than they were before the pushing and forcing happened. Yeah. Right. So sometimes that really backfires because children just aren't there yet. They're not ready yet. They're pushed and forced. And then, of course, their motivation does not increase.
It's counterproductive, isn't it? Yes.
Yes.
And
yes.
You know, it's a message that goes out very strongly, especially
Yes.
in your part of the world, unfortunately, that that there's a correct way of being, and parents, professionals' job is to force the child to conform to that way of being. It's about conformity, and what you say is a really powerful and important message about understanding the power of trusting a child. It's transformative. That's what's going to make the difference. You believe in it. You must have heard of the experiment that was done where they had, there's various variations on this, but you had school teachers and new teachers going to a school, and one of them was put with the top class and one of them was put with the bottom class, but they were told that it was the other way around. And after a few weeks, the bottom class, who had the teacher who thought they were working with the top class, they started excelling in ways that hadn't previously been thought possible. And the top class, which had a teacher who thought they were the bottom class, started to, drop grades and not do so well. And it's just the power of the belief that we have in children to transform the children in a good way or a bad way. And it's about trusting the child. But to do that, it's really difficult to help a parent to trust the child if the parent is getting 95% of their messaging from places that are confirming their fear that what the child is doing is a problem and is going to cause them problems in later life. It's a big question, isn't it? How do we get to that point where we can solidify that message for parents?
Absolutely, Guy. And I think that's exactly right. We have to help. Again, we have to give parents different information. And we have to, I believe, that professionals need to become much more aware, aware of it and responsible for the messages that we're sending. And again, with good intentions. Professionals are trying, they're based on their beliefs and their perspective and their training. They're trying to sometimes push kids to do in their minds what they believe is going to be most helpful, right? You have a child that doesn't seem to be interacting, doesn't seem to be connected or engaged. So of course, what do we know long-term is helpful for all kids to have social relationships. And so I got to push. And I believe very strongly that that we have made things much harder, especially for neurodivergent children, by creating those kinds of environments for kids where they're pushed and forced. One of the best clips that I've seen more recently, and I think I sent it to you, is of Nick Walker, who lives here in the Bay Area. He's a psychologist and a professor, and is autistic, and he really talks directly about this notion of play and how to sort of play with an autistic child. And he says, relax, right? As a neurotypical person or parent, relax and actually give yourself permission to just be with a child who is playing in a particular way. If it's lining things up, that's okay. The child is doing that for a legitimate reason. There's no reason to push or change or interrupt or fix. And I am so fortunate that in my own training over the years, I actually studied in and was trained in approaches that were very developmental and very relationship based, where I had opportunities to go against my own initial training, which was more sort of behavioral, where I was trying to push and force and challenge. And I had experiences where I was simply being with children and not trying to make anything happen, but just really noticing and observing them closely and learning more about perhaps why they were doing what they were doing, so that I could even do it with them, or so that I could even just sort of reflect back to them how cool it was that they were playing in a particular way with something, that they were getting information about the toy, the object, in ways that as a neurotypical person, I wasn't seeing, I wasn't valuing, right? The subtle qualities of like this pen I'm holding, for example. If I really slow myself down and look at it very closely and touch it and feel the texture of it, I'm getting a totally different experience than if I'm just, holding it and writing it really quickly. But as a neurotypical person, my brain wasn't wired in such a way where I was really slowing down and getting all this really incredibly powerful sensory information about a toy. So that's the gift I've been given from autistic people, learning how to slow down and tune into these incredible details of objects that I was missing, honestly, for a good portion of my development. And that's a very different way, again, to look at it. There's something, again, going back to your quote about wondering, what was it again? Wondering instead of...
Curious, not furious.
Curious, not furious. Rather than being furious about the fact that a child is lining up a toy or playing repetitively with an object, I want to get really curious about what kind of experience they're giving themselves, what they're learning from that. And again, this can be so challenging for parents to allow themselves to do that, because again, they keep hearing, they're bombarded with this message over and over again that the worst possible thing you can do is reinforce or allow your child to play in these kinds of what look like repetitive, kind of meaningless ways with objects. And that's a terrible message. And I got that message as a professional over and over again. And so again, we have a lot of unlearning to do. I mean, I really see that a lot of my work, honestly, with families is not sort of, parent training or even parent coaching. It's in some ways parent unlearning, right? It's and professional unlearning, where I'm really having to help professionals unlearn a lot of the stuff that we've learned that has led us to kind of push and force and drive autistic and neurodivergent children to develop, but in ways that backfire ultimately.
Yeah, it's important. And I like what you said about, if a child is playing like this, it's for a reason. And it goes back to having trust in the child, doesn't it? That, what they're doing is not sabotaging their own lives, and it's not sort of putting themselves in a compromised position. What they're doing is they understand themselves better than anybody else does, even on an unconscious level. And what they're doing is optimizing their future prospects by doing things in a way and in an order that is going to make sense to them and that's going to unlock the best potential for them in the future. And when we come in, like you say, curious, we come in curious to that, then we're reinforcing that that's a good thing, that we trust them, that we have faith in them, that we know everything's going to be okay. But if we come in and give them the message because we're thinking it, that there's a problem with what they're doing, that it's not normal, there's something wrong with them for doing it, that they're going to imbibe that, and that's going to undermine the work they're doing on their own to optimize their best prospects. The best things we can do with that, the best thing we can do as parents, is to cooperate with our child's way of steering their own life.
That's right. Yes. And again, back to Nick Walker's, the wisdom that he, continues to share with the neurotypical world. He says, his what's the one thing, I think, Nick is asked, what's the one thing, what's the message you most want to give parents? And the first thing he says is relax. It's okay. Yeah. Your child it's going to be okay. Your child's okay. And that's powerful.